Billions of dollars and millions of lives are at stake when we're talking about this upcoming presidential election. We've got Donald Trump going against Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. It's locked in, folks. Let's get right into this prediction. So as we all know, we have a wide open map with a low floor, high ceiling sort of model I've got projected right here. We also got a ton of polls to consult, so let's get right into it. Right off the jump, we're going straight into the unbiased source. We've got RCP polling, which is the #1 holy grail website for surveys. I got to tell you, thousands of people are employed by asking thousands of American citizens who they'd vote for if the election were held today, and we're going to do it right now. As you can see, most of these general election polls are pro-Trump. Just if you go by item, it's almost all Trump. Recently, we see some more favorable matchups. The one state that you would say is pretty close is going to be Pennsylvania, okay? So that's the quasi-home state for Joe Biden. But if we look at the general election polls, and even if we look at the presidential job approval rating, we have Joe Biden at a negative 13.3, okay? So Joe Biden's approval is 14 points behind what Donald Trump's was back then, if you were to match it up. Now, if you look at the presidential general election results, you'll look at almost all but two polls have Donald Trump either tying or leading the popular vote. Again, Trump lost the popular vote by 4 to 5% in 2020. We've got a presidential election in which we see a guy winning by 1.7, okay? So that's the math we're looking on. Basically, since last month, Trump has been really running amok in this election, okay? He's been really tearing shop. And so we're going to make that model project through into this election. Now, here's why the poll matters so much. Here's why, basically, you need to know as to exactly how him leading on polls on the internet will change the election. Well, basically, Trump is leading. What does that mean? Biden is playing from behind. What does that mean? It means higher spending from the Democrats. Well, what does that mean? Well, if Trump is winning in the swing states, then evidently he's more likely to win the states that aren't so close. Well, what happens is that the funding gets diverted. So yes, these sort of surveys make millions of dollars be spent in different places. It's crazy. Anyway, let's fill this out. Right now, New Mexico, Colorado is going blue. We can say that pretty assuredly. We have a closer Virginia than expected, but still blue. We have New Hampshire, which for whatever reason will stay blue. You have Minnesota, which will also stay blue because they're stubborn. But you have Iowa, Ohio, places that you'd have Romney and McCain types really struggling to win, going Republican. We have states like Texas, Florida. These are pretty locked in. And as you can see, we're getting right into the bones of the prediction. Again, we're not wasting time here, folks. We are not going to waste your time. We're going to just fill it all the way in. As you can see here, you'll notice real quick that you've got an election which is more likely to be pro-Trump than that isn't. But this is the map we're realistically talking about. Okay, these 5 swing states, which is Nevada, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, these are the states that ultimately will decide the election. The order in which that they're important is in Pennsylvania first, Michigan second, Arizona third, then Wisconsin. Nevada, if you look at the math, if you look at all the different combinations of which you could win the election to get to 270 electoral votes, Nevada is hardly, if ever, the decision maker. Okay, so you don't need to really discuss it. But the bottom line is that when we're talking about places such as the Midwest, we're seeing demography dictate the political geography. Okay, so we're basically looking at surveys as well. These Real Clear Politics polls, 538 polls, all these things that I've looked into and studied for research-wise for this video indicate that Donald Trump is going to win all these swing states in general. Now, there's some fluke outlier polls, but when you have 80% of the polls having one candidate win, more often than not, that's going to be the case. Also, keep in mind, we have an election, and again, people could say, well, election shenanigans, oh, they might, right? Okay, look, I can only go off what the polls say. I can't say, well, magically they're going to insert 80,000 ballots in Wisconsin. I mean, I can't account for that. So again, this is if the election is clean, which might be a tough thing to ask. It's like saying, is this supermodel a virgin? I mean, probably not, but we can hope it is true. And when we're looking at, for instance, the great state of Wisconsin, again, we look at the demography. We look at who's running. We don't have a popular Democrat buoying up the support of Joe Biden. What we do have is a presidential candidate in Donald Trump who's leading the state in the polls. That state is more likely than not going to go Republican. You look at the state of Nevada. Nevada has a Republican governor. They have a state that is orienting itself, despite Latin immigration, to be more Republican. The reason being is that the Republican Party has been getting a stronger fixture and stranglehold over the funding of the parties, just irrespective of what it is exactly, but just political spending is higher in parity than it is for other states. The Republicans are just being better at what they're doing. Prior to Trump, they really didn't have an idea. They had the Obama types. They had the Harry Reid people. These people had a political machine circa 2012 in the prime of that era, and they were basically running the state. We're talking about state legislature and Senate, Democrat for a while. We're talking about a governor that was Democrat. You had an office in the Senate, both seats, Democrat for the longest time. We're seeing that being fractured as we speak. And so the state is orienting itself back to the Republican ethos of the Bush era. Now, that being said, we have other states that are a little more contemptuous. We also have a wildcard factor in RFK. If RFK gets on the ballot in a lot of these swing states, then you could definitely guarantee that a lot of people that are the Joe Rogan types, the people that wouldn't vote or would vote Biden, are going to go for either Trump or RFK. That benefits Trump at the end of the day, obviously. Okay. When we're looking at different people, okay, Kamala Harris, a hindrance to the ballot. According to the Project Veritas, or more specifically, James O'Keefe, he went undercover. He basically pretended to be some like gay guy's friend that works for Joe Biden. He basically lets the cat out the bag, saying that, well, actually, we wanted to get rid of Kamala, but we can't. Well, guess what? Because they were afraid of losing black voters. But these black voters are not going to come out in mass to vote for Joe Biden in Georgia. Hence why we're going to have Georgia as Republican. The fact is that when we're looking at it, Georgia is really being ran well by Brian Kemp, and that's really the secret to all of it. I mean, when we're looking at the main mechanisms for electoral, the counting of ballots, we have Georgia looking solid Republican no matter what you see, and the polls are really proving me right. You look at the state like Ohio. Ohio is too far gone. Sherrod Brown, oh, he won 2018. Yeah, but not by as much as you think, against a crappy Republican in a blue wave. Okay. Also, Biden wasn't on the ballot. Biden is unpopular shit. We already discussed this. He's down 13.3%. I mean, it's just that obvious. We look at the state of Michigan. Michigan, again, what's going on? Israel-Palestine. Israel-Palestine is really going to be one of these things to which you could honestly say is going to sway the election for Trump. You might say, well, how is that true? Well, there's a lot of Arabs, a lot of Muslims in Dearborn, Michigan. Tens of thousands of them. Too many. Anyway, they're actually helping the Republican Party for once. Usually they'd be voting Democrat since the Bush era, but now they're voting Republican more so than they otherwise would, or at least sitting out the election for the Democratic side, because Joe Biden is pro-Israel. Now, granted, Donald Trump is even more pro-Israel, but again, it's not so much that they're going to vote Trump. It's that these Muslims are just going to sit it out. So there's going to be tens of thousands of votes that are there for Biden or Hillary in 2020, 2016. They're going to be sat in their mosque. They're not going to come out and vote. There's other factors in Michigan as well. Trump is leading in the polls, mind you, but granted, the Michigan GOP is pretty distraught. It's pretty broke, but the changing of arms is coming on. We have different leadership taking president, and that's going to be great. So Michigan is tending to be Republican, okay? So along with the sister state of Wisconsin, that works out. We move on to the state of Arizona. Arizona, by all means, is going Republican. Some things are changing. The demography, more Latinos. Again, that is bad for the Republican Party. That being said, though, the ones that are coming, not necessarily Republican, but the ones that are already here over time they act more whitewashed. Basically, they're going to vote more Republican going forward. That is a good thing for the GOP. That's going to assimilate and kind of ameliorate the impending crisis that is coming demographically with this influx of illegal aliens. It's going to offset the difference, okay? So that's going to be decent. We're looking at the suburbs. These are not so antithetical to Donald Trump as they were before because Joe Biden has fumbled it that bad, okay? And when it comes to the one saving grace that all of these people on Twitter that are saying that Biden's going to win somehow, once they take a hit from their crack pipe and they come up with the bullshittiest sort of thing they could possibly come up with and say, well, according to this abortion thing, it's going to drive Democratic turnout in Arizona. Well, it turns out, actually, folks, that sort of proposal, even if it does get enough signings, which it very well could be, the problem is that the Arizona Supreme Court is going to probably strike that clause down on the ballot. If you look at the board, the composition of the Supreme Court, the bench in Arizona is 7-2 Republican appointed. What does that tell you, folks? It tells you that by and large, it's going to be obviously partial to the Republican cause. So if they get the option, if you sue the ballot initiative of abortion and you give it to a slanted Republican majority on the fucking packed judge court or whatever you want to call it, the Supreme Court, they're going to strike it out, in which case the Democratic Hail Mary is not going to solve them of any issues. And so you got that right there. Before we get to Pennsylvania, guys, like the video, subscribe to the channel. I am obviously the best political coverage person you could ever ascribe to. this sort of little niche topic. I'm the best ever. You're welcome. Anyway, let's go to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania also, besides that one poll we ran across earlier, is evidently going to be Republican. And it tells you exactly why. You read the demography, you look at what John Fetterman is saying, a guy who's a retarded leftist. This big ogre is even saying that the immigration thing is out of hand, among other issues. Plus, again, Joe Biden, who was selling on bona fides and coattails of going to college there or something like 30 years ago. Well, that's being generous, maybe 50 years ago. Scranton Joe apparently is going to be over here talking about, oh, I'm from Pennsylvania. I think that's not going to work, okay? Look, Pennsylvania's down bad. They need to change the leadership. The Steelers suck. The Eagles lost in the wild card. I mean, it's a depressing showing for the entire state of the Keystone Empire here. So overall, you can see it going Republican as well. Think of the gas prices. They're not as bad as they used to be. People will remember this. They'll remember how weak the economy is. They'll remember how ineffective the leadership has been recently. And again, keep in mind all of this, folks. The reason why Trump is going to win, because of the fact that he's leading now going forward into later 2024, is essentially because when you see states like Minnesota or New Mexico or Virginia being closer than you would expect, the Biden people will reflexively say, well, we need to win these states like Virginia, New Mexico, Colorado, Minnesota, or else we're going to lose all the other swing states. So when Joe Biden was leading in the polls a year ago, he could have been said that, well, we'll spend all of our money on Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona. Now they're spending tens of millions of dollars on Minnesota, Virginia, etc. Now they have a lot less money to play with. That's the problem, okay? So when you're leading the game, the defense has to guard the run. They got to stop the run. When they stop the run, you can pass. So Trump can now pass on these fools. Whereas before, they could have guarded everything. Now they got to drop their guard and handle other issues. That's why Donald Trump is going to win this election as of today. I'll see y'all in the next video. Adios.